Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Today we are going to be discussing another concepts in engineering management and quality management. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on engineers in the market and service space, and a little bit about project organization, managing projects, and how leadership and control of projects factors into the equation. So my name is Dr. John Jektiani. I'm pleased to be here with you for the next, let's say half an hour or so. We will focus on these areas. At the end of the session, we'll take your questions and discuss anything else that you might have in relation to these topics. So looking at our overall roadmap in terms of management of technology, this is, again, marketing. We're going to be discussing marketing in the way of managing technology, not to make you marketers. This is not a marketing class, but really how engineering and technology professionals play in the marketing space. And we'll also later be talking about the project management aspect. But first, on to the technology components. I want to talk about what the role is of an engineer. Engineers and technical people are playing greater roles in the marketing and the business side of the corporation. And I also want to talk about and discuss various ways that engineers work in the service industry. Don't forget, let's remind ourselves what marketing is about. Marketing is the central function that is the interface between a company and the customers or the recipients of its services and goods that it serves, okay? Marketing relationships are very, very broad and deep. They can be transaction-based, although they're not always transaction-based, but marketing is a sustainable process in a company. It should have some strategic benefit, and there should be some commitment from a management standpoint, okay? It doesn't always happen, but these are the necessary best practices for successful marketing endeavors, okay? If we think about the industrial products that we're engineers typically deal with, you're talking about installation-related services and products, accessories, raw materials, fabrics. There's service aspects as well. There's fabrication, of course, but then when the products are installed and in production, we're talking about a lot of maintenance and repair and operations and service and end-of-life cycling of products and so on and so forth. So this is the breadth of industrial manufacturing, let's say, and the services and manpower that companies provide to their customers, okay? Now, we all know selling is very easy, okay, relative to, you know, if you've got a good product and you've got a good value proposition, that's of course a given. Product should sell itself. I mean, that's the kind of companies, by the way, you want to work for. If you work for strong companies in strong markets with strong demand, the selling process and the growth process should be relatively easy. And of course, as you can imagine, it's a continuum. What sells good today or easy today may not sell tomorrow, so everything has to be adjusted, okay, for the environment and the changing landscape. But once the sale is done, maintaining that customer, okay, maintaining the equipment that you've sold, maintaining the relationship, that's hard, okay, especially when new revenue is not necessarily immediately apparent. Your management, your company measurements, metrics are going to invariably shift you towards servicing new customers where there are new sales targets and new sales incentives, right? Obviously. But maintenance, maintaining customers is really important because we've learned over experience and we've read, you must have read the chapter and the readings leading up to this discussion, where cost of maintaining a customer or worse yet, gaining a customer is very expensive. So you don't want to lose customers because you can't maintain those relationships, right? So we need to make sure that maintenance is a key focus for our engineers and for our marketing department as well. Well, that brings us to the service industry, right? Servicing is about servicing customers. Let's not forget, these are major stats, right? In America, 7 out of 10 people, well, before the pandemic, of course. Now, very few people are working to begin with, but 7 out of 10, 7 to 8 out of 10 people are in the service sector. 2/3 of our GNP here in the States comes from service, all right? And we've seen states like Florida and Nebraska and other states that are completely focused on the service industry almost exclusively. So lots of service jobs, lots of service opportunities. Satisfying customers is paramount for any business. The average service business loses 10% of volume due to poor service. 96% of the customers are unhappy, but they don't complain. 90% never return. Each one tells at least 9 others, and 13 tell more than 20 others. So you can see this is like COVID virus spread, right? Right? It's exponential, right? Unhappy customers can spread bad will very fast and bring a company down to its knees, frankly, if it's not planned right or if it's not accounted for. Each happy customer, though, tells at least 5 customers. So happy customers sell products themselves, right? So it's real important for companies to understand this aspect, but not all of them do. And a lot of it has to do with the metrics, right? People measure not necessarily the things that are going to make the company successful. So the best opportunity to increase sales and market share is through your present customer base. If you keep satisfying and serving the customer base, you don't have to prove your credibility over and over again. It costs 5 times as much, perhaps even more, to attract new customers than it does to maintain an existing one. Extremely, extremely important. The best indication of a company's long-term success is how people view it in terms of after the sale, right? Very, very important. Well, e-marketing is the digital marketing wave that we're in. It's redefining the marketing place. It's altering the strategies. It's connecting customers. So not only through digital media and social media do companies connect with customers, but customers connect with other customers of the same company very easily by you looking at the reviews, the forums, the feedback, etc. Right? Just think about it. If you want to buy a laptop from Amazon, you go there, you can connect with thousands of people who've already bought the same product and ask them how they're doing with it. Shit, this is incredible. And marketing has to get ahead of that and make sure they use that to the benefit of increasing sales and increasing the brand loyalty and brand customer base, right? And this e-marketing allows for more global competition. We can buy products from anywhere because we can connect. We can connect with companies in China. We can connect with companies in India. Oh my God, it's like amazing stuff, right? Like you can use this. With technical employment, manufacturing here has decreased and services has increased. I can tell you that through this challenging times that we're having, every country is going to be looking at their financial model to make sure if this works in the future. I'm not sure the United States is well served to be so focused on service and very little on manufacturing. We can't even make masks now. A simple thing like masks we're not able to make because all of that has been outsourced, that capability has been outsourced. And our healthcare professionals are suffering. Likewise, other countries have their challenges that are very similar. So everyone's going to have to redefine themselves in some ways as we come out of this biological issue that we're having. There are many service industry examples, right? Computer applications, software, government, Department of Defense, all the green energy stuff, college teaching, biomedical services, so on and so forth. So there's a ton of stuff that is, reflective of and obviously the service industry offers much opportunity to all of us, right? So this is just a little bit of an overview of how we play and can play and what are the different aspects of the service industry. So next I want to talk about project management in the realm of how it plays an important role, very crucial role in managing of technology. Project management is a universal topic. It's very near and dear to me. It's a discipline. It's art and science put together. I've been teaching project management at the collegiate level for 15 years in various universities, as well as private training and education sessions that I offer. I teach it to corporate stakeholders as well. And I was a project manager, am a project manager in industry. for the last really 28 years of my life. So this is really big. I'm PMP certified, but I don't believe in certification personally. I just had to do it because when I started teaching at the collegiate level, the dean said, hey, you're great in project management, but I'm not going to let you teach it unless you have PMP. I said, are you kidding? I have 15 years of experience and you want PMP. So I did the PMP certification. I recommend that people, many of you are going to be aspiring project managers. You have to get certified. You have to get Scrum certified, Agile certified, PMP certified. You know, anything you can pay money for and get certified, study for an exam. It's beneficial to your resume and people look for that. But I look for skill. I look for aptitude. Project managers have a certain type of aptitude that I look for when I hire them. And just because you pass an exam doesn't mean I will hire you, but the industry certainly likes certification. So I recommend everyone to look into getting that if you and when you get ready for that stage of your career. So in the next few minutes, I want to describe the three main elements of a project. I want to talk about the importance of scope. I want to talk about scheduling techniques. I want to talk about what it means by crashing and burning projects. Okay, we don't literally burn them and crash them like a car and, you know, going off of a cliff or like, you know, not like that, but it's close. That's why I use crashing terminology. And of course, life cycle, the project life cycle is important to understand all the steps and how it fits. Okay, let's talk about what a project means. When we talk about project management, the first word in project management is project. Now, many of you think you know what project management is, but I can guarantee you in the next 5 minutes, every single person who's listening to this tutorial or training session will learn something that they did not know, okay? Guaranteed. Okay? Unbelievable that I can say that to you, right? I know I have people like Mahendra, I have Subramaniam, I have so many other people who have some experience. Arun, you have experience teaching, I'm not teaching, but in the workforce. And I'm confident that I'm going to share something with you that you didn't know, okay? Which is pretty cool, right? If you can guarantee learning something in the next 5 minutes, that's awesome, right? That's great return on your investment, guys. I'm teasing you. Okay, so let's talk about project, right? What is a project? Well, project's the first part of project management. So a project is a one-time job that has a definite starting point and an ending point, a clearly defined objective, scope, and budget, all right? Not usually, almost always a budget. So it's fixed. There are three things, right? There's a triangle. There's scope, schedule, and cost, okay? And if you don't have those three things defined and your manager says they have a project for you, you can tell your manager that the professor that you have, very nice professor, by the way, says that that's not a project, okay? You can tell him that. He'll probably fire you, but then I won't be responsible, okay? But the point is, a project, we don't know that. When we do things, right, we do routine tasks. They're not projects. Projects in the context of project management have these three things. They have a schedule, a defined starting and end point, and scope and budget. They're not usually things like brushing your teeth in the morning, right? That is a routine thing. Sure, you can look at it as a project, but doing a case study for a class might be a project. You know what you want to get. You know how much time you have. You know how much grade it's worth. It's defined, right? And sure, it may be similar to the case study you did last week or something like that, but that's a project. If you're building a car, that's a project, okay? You've got some sort of deliverable, you've got some sort of plan or structure that you need to come up with. But if you're like walking down the street, that's not a project, even though you can think of it as a project. So if your boss asks you to do a routine exercise that you might be engaged in, and they'll call it a project, but it's not really a project, okay? And why am I saying that? Because it's really important in the context of project management tools and techniques that you have the essential considerations of a project. Namely, you're dealing with cost, schedule, performance, because these are the three variables that we do trade-offs with when the projects have to be adjusted. If you don't have one or more of these, you can't use all the tools that I'm about to share with you or that you learn when you do a certified project management course, okay? I'm about to give you project management in a nutshell, like in 5 minutes, because that's all we have time for in this course. But I encourage you to take one of my project management courses to really learn how to use all of these expansive things we're going to talk about in much more detail. Because this is probably the most useful tool set, useful training you'll get for the real world in your entire master's curriculum, in my opinion. Okay? Because it's transferable. If you can use it in any industry. So a project proposal process is the description of what the scope is and the schedule and the budget. You've got to have proposals, right? When you present for like you bid for a project or you come up with a plan, you've got to define scope, you've got to define schedule, you've got to define budget. You can make assumptions. If they're not defined, you can make assumptions, but you have to be working with these three components. Okay? I can't stress that enough. I also call that the triple constraint model. Why is it triple constraint? Because you're constrained by these three things, right? Once you have scope defined, schedule defined, budget defined, if those things change, they can't change because you've agreed that with your stakeholders. You know? So when they change, you have to do a change request. You have to modify the baseline plan. So these things bound, they configure the project, right? And therefore then help you manage it. So proactive businesses prepare in advance. They make sure they have the technical skills to even do the assessments and do the estimates. Then of course they need the right people to do the project. Sometimes we hire outside consultants to help on our projects. We assess the technology that we need. We assess the markets. We assess how expensive is it to complete the proposal itself. Sometimes a proposal takes a lot of work and you need approval for the proposal. A statement of work is when everything is defined, all those three components are defined, and you put it down in a document, you get agreement. You've got objectives, you've got schedules, you've got specifications, you've got clauses, some terms and conditions. Maybe there's some financial incentives to vendors that you can give to help do the projects more on time, or, I mean, there's so many creative things you can do with the clauses, right? The T&Es, or T&Ms, the terms, right? Or T&Cs, I'm sorry, terms and conditions, right? Now, processes are different. If you're dealing with projects in the government versus commercial, for profit or nonprofit organizations, there are some nuances, but by and large, you're still managing to those three things, right? Cost, time, scope, right? If you do not use proper project management, right? If you do not balance this triangle, right? The triple constraint model, you can have burnout. You can affect employee morale. You can affect relationship with customers. You can lose customers on the worst end. You can miss deadlines. You might have to redo work. And if, you know, these are things that can happen and blindside you if you're not using proper PM techniques, right? So a scope refers to what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the goals of the projects? What client need are we trying to satisfy? What is the success criteria? Guys, it is very important to explain and articulate to everybody once you're managing a project what the success criteria is. How do you define success? Not by finishing the project. Oh no, we can all say we finished the project. I can finish this class right now and say, hey, class finished. Did I meet the objective though? Was it a successful class? Just because I had a class doesn't mean it was successful, right? Doesn't mean it achieved the learning objectives. Just because you're taking a course in college doesn't mean you learned everything you needed to do. We defined the scope of this class, for example, in the syllabus. We agreed to it. So now we've got to manage to it, right? We have a defined time, we have defined budget, we have defined scope. Can we run this class like a project? Absolutely, right? So you've got to have success criteria, and there are going to be risks, right? We didn't know, but there was a risk. We didn't know COVID-19 was coming back in January and we're going to be doing this stuff offline. That was an unknown risk. Well, it happened. We accommodated the risk and we mitigated it by having Zoom and other things, right? So to manage a project, got to define the project, plan the project, execute the project, okay? Monitor and control the project and close the project. These 5 steps, by the way, are how PMP is certified. If you ever wanted to go get a PMP certification, they're going to give you 1,200 pages of a manual to study that you get an exam on. That's is divided into these 5 areas. This is project management in a nutshell. Nothing else exists in project management, okay? Problem definition, which is scope, plan, which is the project planning part, executing, which is delivery, monitoring and control, which is oversight, and closing is learning from the experience so that you can have better successes later, and also to see if you achieved the benefit. Did you solve the problem that you defined? You do that at the closing stage. Of course, documentation and sign-offs and all of that other good stuff too, right? So defining the problem means, what is the purpose? What's the need that we're trying to satisfy? Planning the project means, what has to be done? Who's going to do it? How will it be done? How much will it cost? What do we need? What are the tools, skills, software, hardware, whatever, buildings, right? Assembly lines. What do we need to do the project? Got to plan it out, right? Effective planning means what? We have to set aside time to plan to plan, right? Plan to plan. People implementing the plan should be involved in preparing the plan. That's another best practice. If management plans everything and delivers it to the employees are not going to have a buy-in, right? They need to understand the purpose. Why are we doing this? How am I involved? How can I be successful if the project is successful? What are the incentives? You got to plan the whole thing, right? And you got to leave time and resources to do the planning. Many people start a project, they forget, they're like, okay, we're going to plan on the fly. Then it's a disaster. Can't do that. Not at all. So you got to have goals. What do we need to do? Who do we do it for? How do we do it? Oh, you got to have objectives, right? Every project has to have objectives. What are objectives? Well, there are things that you need to accomplish. But they're not just anything that you put on paper. You've got to have what we call SMART objectives. What is SMART? As opposed to dumb. No, SMART is the objectives have to be specific, they have to be measurable, they have to be attainable, they have to be realistic. And they're time limited. You can't just have an objective that we have no timeline attached to. So every time you have objectives, any objectives, personal objectives, project objectives, make sure they're SMART. Otherwise, they're worth nothing to me and to probably you. You just don't know it. So make sure any objectives you have are specific. If your objective is to get an A in this class, you better make them SMART. You can't just say you need an A. How? How are you going to get an A? How do you measure, are you getting an A? Are you getting A's as you go along? Are you getting A's on every case study? Are you getting A's on every reinforcement, right? Is it really attainable for you? Maybe you're working 80 hours a week and you're taking 5 classes. Maybe it's not attainable. Maybe it's not realistic. So wanting an A and having an objective, a SMART objective of getting an A is 2 different things, okay? Similarly on projects, when you have project objectives, you gotta make them SMART, S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time limited. Obviously, they have to be consistent with the overall organization. They can't sit on their own. To develop a detailed plan, you need to get the project team involved. First, you identify the project team. Then you identify the activities with the project team. You estimate durations. You determine what resources are needed. And then you construct a network. What's a network? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about milestone schedules. You have schedules with key start dates and end dates for every activity. They get grouped by milestone. They may include extra or implicit or explicit entrance and exit criteria for each milestone, which means if I have requirements phase for a project and a design phase, those might be milestones. What does it take for me to get out of the requirements phase and enter the design phase? I have to define that exit criteria up front to make sure that that plan is successful, if you get my drift. A work breakdown structure is absolutely necessary. This is a key element, key tool for project planning. We call it WBS in short. It's a level-by-level subdivision of the work that needs to be performed. When I say under a contract, I mean when you're bidding for work outside or you're contracting to another client, but it also implies for internal projects in your own company. Because once you have a plan and you sign off, it's an implicit contract. So the nice thing about the WBS, it helps you take a complicated task and help it subdivide it into several smaller tasks. And you keep dividing all the tasks into smaller tasks until you can't divide them anymore. Usually like 3 or 4 levels. 3 at the top end, maybe 4, maybe 5, you know, but then you can't do 10 levels because then you're probably, you know, don't have the tasks at the right level to begin with. Then we move, after the plan, we move to execute the plan. Believe it or not, execute the plan. If you do everything up before the execution stage, it's easier, right? Execution is just following the plan and establishing the operating rules, right? You got to have, how are people going to work together? How are you going to level project resources? What does it mean to level project resources? Well, you can't have one person working so many hours a day and other people working less because there's a skill gap. You have to be able to level the organization, the project organization, right? You've got to make, if I give Sakif all the work because he's good and my hands are in very little work, there's going to be inequity, right? So I've got to figure out how to keep the project team leveled, if you will, from a work standpoint. Very hard to do because everybody's skills are different, right? It's a very hard job. It's not easy, but it's necessary. You with me, Roshni? And then you put a schedule, right? After the tasks are there, you've got to have schedules so that people can execute to those schedules, right? Schedule meaning time. Every task, when is it going to start? When is it going to end? How long is it going to take? All that has to be there. Once execution starts, you've got to make sure throughout the project you monitor and control, right? That's that second to last step in the 5-step process. So here you establish reporting guidelines. How are you going to report on project status? What is the change control process? That is imperative. Things are going to change. No matter how good the plan is, the environment's going to change, market's going to change, your internal company is going to change, COVID-19 is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So many things can happen. The sky can fall. Sometimes good and bad things can happen, but you need to be able to change from the original plan, and you need to have a change control process. Meaning, who's going to be involved? Who are we going to consult? Who are we going to inform that our plan is changing? Who do we need to get approval for? Maybe we need more budget. Maybe we, you know, whatever the changes are, there has to be an approval and a control process. And you always monitor the progress of the plan versus the original plan. Sorry, you monitor the project progress against the original plan to see how you're doing. Sometimes you need to revise the plan because things change, and that's okay. You've got the change control process. Finally, when you're done and when you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, you got to make sure that when everything is done, all your deliverables are done, you obtain customer acceptance. The customer that you're trying to serve has to say, yes, thank you to you and your team. I accept what you're giving me, and it does solve my need, right? You install all the project deliverables. Sometimes it's software, hardware, whatever. You put it in place for the customer the way you have agreed and designed. You make sure all the documentation, the contracts, the technical specs, everything is buttoned down. You issue a final report, and then you, of course, last but not least, you don't forget to celebrate, okay? You got to celebrate your success. You got to reflect. All right. So that's in a nutshell how the high-level steps of project planning and management. Well, here's a question that I want you to think about. Okay, what is the difference between engineering management and project management? I'll let you stew over that, right? We've learned so much about engineering management. We learned so much about project management. Now I'm going to ask you this probably as a later reinforcement or an exam question, but this is something you want to ponder. Is there a difference? What is the difference, etc.? So let's look at some networking, network diagram stuff. Models for project planning, right? There's a Gantt chart. What's a Gantt chart? Well, Henry Gantt created the Gantt chart, right? The Gantt chart is literally a left to right bar chart like schedule. You've all probably seen it, you don't recognize it, okay? And CPM is a critical path method. PERT was invented with some military projects back in the 40s and stuff. And then there's software that actually takes care of all of this, so you don't have to do it manually. Things like Microsoft Project, right? These are software tools that help you do it. So again, Henry Gantt, tasks, precedence relationship, durations of tasks, and then you convert it to a bar chart. That is literally how you do this. It's easiest to assemble and update. okay? It's very easy to do, not very costly, but it's only good for when projects are, smaller and short term. For longer term projects with lots of activities, it's very confusing. It's very difficult to author a Gantt chart and display it and share it. So it has its pluses and minuses. It's very simple. Project planning tools like a network scheduling diagram, critical path method. The PERT stands for Program Evaluation Review Technique. It was created by the aerospace and armed forces industry, okay, related industry. That's where it stemmed because the projects were very complicated. And what it does is it takes the most optimistic scenario of getting tasks done, the most likely scenario, and the pessimistic scenario. So positive scenario, worst case, and then the most likely, and sort of averages it, right? That's the easiest way you can think about it. CPM and PERT properties, well, the activities have to be well defined. Only then can you do these techniques, right? You have to also understand that activities that's defined by your project plan can start and stop independently of each other. And some activities have precedence relationships, right? So in other words, for example, a design stage to start may not be possible for some software projects unless the requirements are complete, right? Whereas other parts of the project, you may be able to design something even while requirements is not fully complete or is concurrent. So you've got to really go down to that level and figure out what precedes activities. If you have that information, you can use things like CPM, which is very activity oriented, right? CPM talks about critical path. What is the critical path? The critical path is the longest duration from start to finish of the project, okay? And I'll show you this in a little bit more. It's very costly to maintain a CPM chart because if one thing changes, other things changes, but you can use software, right? That makes it easier. It's very nice and applicable and helpful for long-term projects where the activities are very predictable, right? So CPM is used in many cases by these software tools inherent. You don't even have to know that it's using it. It's built into the packages that help you manage, okay? PERT's really used for more complex. That's why I was starting the aerospace and the military installations. They had very, very complex, multi-year, thousands of resources to manage. And so they came up with this technique, right? These are some of the critical activities, critical terminology. There's an activity, we kind of know what that is. There's critical activity, there's path, and then critical path. Critical path is the most important to understand, and people get confused. It's the longest duration of the task. In other words, if the critical path is delayed on a project, the whole project is delayed. That's why it's called critical. Project management is worried about critical path because if something changes and the critical path is delayed, the entire project is delayed. If another path of a sequence of work is delayed, it might be still okay by balancing and leveling resources because it's not the critical path. And I'll show you what that means in a second. So let's take an example of a production facility, right? You can see this facility has several aspects to it. You see design, production tooling takes 4 weeks, but it has no predecessor. That means that it can be done starting now, right? There's nothing to precede it. Preparing manufacturing drawings takes 6 weeks. Again, you can do that independent of the predecessor, meaning you can do job 1, 2, and 3 here at the same time. However, when you get to job 4, procure tooling, you really need information from jobs 1, 2, and 3, especially 1. You need to design the production tooling so that you can procure it in this example. That's why I've got 1 on the predecessor column. That means it shows that job 1 is a predecessor to job 4. Likewise, job 5 has a predecessor of 2. Job 6 actually has a predecessor of 3, 4, and 5. That means 3, 4, and 5 have to be done before 6 can begin. And so on and so forth. This is a very simple example. But you can almost see, if I were to ask you to flowchart this from left to right, okay? you can see from left to right. And in your textbook, it actually, I think, shows you this example or other examples where you can visually see it. And I'm going to show you that in a few minutes as well. But you can start to see that you can put flowchart from left to right, going from job 1 to job 8, and connecting the dots or connecting the tasks or activities or jobs in this case with the predecessor. So what's the critical path on a project like this to set up a production facility? Well, it's the longest path, right? That goes from job 1 to job 8. When are we going to finish job 8 given all these predecessors, right? That is the critical path in a nutshell. Okay? Now, if you're a little confused, I'll go over this in a second. Let me just do a pause. Okay, so let's look at some network diagrams. When we talk about network, we are talking about the combination of activities and events that define a project. So network diagrams, scheduled network diagrams are drawn from left to right, and the connections between the activities represents the predecessors, right? So an activity, again, is a specific task or a set of tasks that are required by the project that we defined up front. And it takes some resources and times, right? So this is critical to understand before we can understand the rest of this module, right, or concepts. A path, again, is a series of connected activities. A critical path, once again, is the activity, event, or path which, if delayed, would delay the entire project, okay? So sometimes there can be more than one critical path, but every project will always have a critical path, okay? Sequential activities are activities that can happen, of course, sequentially, have to happen one before the other, so on. Parallel activities are activities that can take place at the same time on a project. Immediate predecessor is exactly how it says, the activity that must be completed just before an activity can start, another activity can start. So here's a simple network diagram. This shows that you start, continue, and end. These are 3 sequential activities, okay? They're different formats. Don't worry about AON or AOA. They're different formats, but basically the same concept, right? So here you got a very simple diagram. It shows the starting node. You've got 1A, 3A, 2A, and end, right? Now, I'm not showing you times here, so you can't really see the critical path, all right? But if you assume that each activity takes exactly the same time, which is not realistic, but let's assume that, how will you determine critical path? Pretty easy, right? It's the path that has the most number of boxes, because if each box is equal, the path that has the most number of boxes is your critical path, right? Because it's going to, in theory, take longer. That's only if, again, the assumption is true where all of these are taking the same amount of time. But typically, we will give you, you will be given, or you will calculate as part of project management what each task and activity is taking. So you begin constructing the network by starting with the initial activity, which we call the start activity, add activities without precedences, and then add activities when you have predecessors, right? So you do the simple ones first, and then you add the predecessor type of activities, and you keep iterating until you get a diagram. So here's an example of a network construction. You start, you continue, you add more, and this is how you build your network, okay? And you finally end it because you've ended, you can end the node because all of the activities on your list, the list I showed you earlier, is finished, right? Again, Gantt, I wanted to show you a Gantt chart. We talked about it earlier, but this is what it would look like, right? Visually. And this is right out of Microsoft Project. So if we talk about solving the network, here's the PERT situation where you have an activity and you have planned optimistic time, most likely time, pessimistic time, and the immediate predecessors, right? Very similar to the diagram I showed you earlier for the sample production facility, except here I've added a scenario where you can see optimistic, most likely, and pessimistic. What does that mean? That means activity A, for example, project management has determined The fastest you can complete activity A is in 10 days or 10 hours, whatever this 10 is. Let's say it's days. Most likely it's going to take 22. And pessimistic happens to be the same. That means it's the worst case, it's going to be 22. So project manager here is assuming that activity A is pretty complex in this project, and it's going to take a long time, much longer than the optimistic. Whereas activity C, you can see most likely is 10. It's between 4 and 16, right? So this is where experts, when they estimate projects, they estimate it based on what they know and the knowledge. And if I gave you this table, you can average these times out, use a formula. If I gave you a formula to average it, and you can develop a network diagram that looks something like this, right? And here's how you calculate activity times. This is, I'm just giving this for fun, really. You don't have to remember this. I'm not going to test you. But when you have this pessimistic time, you basically take this formula, you add, the TE is the first formula that you have to look at. The second formula is the variance and so on. This is expected time is TE. Time expected is A plus 4M plus B. A is the worst time, B is the best time, or vice versa. And 4M, M is the most likely. Why do we have a weight of 4? Because it's most likely. Mathematically, that's the formula, right? You count that 4 times as much as you count the others, and then you divide by 6. Why do you divide by 6? Because you got 4 plus A and B. That's 5 and 6. There's 6 units, actually, right? So you divide by 6 to get an average. And that's how you use PERT, right? By using pessimistic, optimistic, and most likely. And you set up a table like this, and then basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to make this critical path, okay? And when you do the critical path, you can add the time durations, right? Remember we talked about the time duration. Now you have a critical path that's the time duration. I'm not going to discuss Slack. I'll give you some notes on it, but this is probably a little too much for most people on this call in terms of the sophistication of project management I wanted to share with you here, okay? You know, there's obviously, again, you can learn a lot more about this on your own, also going through the PMP certification or taking one of my project management classes where I cover a whole semester of it. But I just want to give you a broad spectrum of how to do a schedule diagram, like a very simple schedule diagram. Here's another Gantt chart example, okay? That's coming out of, you know, what do you call it? A tool. This is not generated in Excel. This is literally a project management software tool. You can generate this in Excel too. It's just a little harder. More Gantt charts. This is just, and this is actually the network. So Microsoft Project also generates a network diagram. It looks weird. It looks like this, but it's a network diagram. It shows the predecessors, you know, everything that we showed like this. This is basically looks like this out of the Microsoft Project software. Microsoft Project even shows a calendar of activities. It can chart out all the work for the team in a nice, neat visual calendar. I'm actually just pulling this out, literally out of my project management class, these slides. As you can see, they're different. I just wanted to give you a good example. So let me pause here. Okay, next up on our discussion here for managing technology is the aspect of project management involving organization of projects, okay? So here we want to talk about different organization structures in the context of project management. We also want to talk about characteristics of what it takes to be an effective project manager. I explained how difficult it is to find good project managers. Not just about project management certification, but it's with skill, aptitude, personality. You know, there's a lot. the importance of having a team and keeping the team together. And then, of course, the last but not least, setting expectations and communications is a very important part of project management. So modern forms of organizations have an increased focus and emphasis on project management. They've realized the value of project management. Most organizations have a project management office. They are focused very heavily on achieving business objectives of projects and having groups of people being responsible for the project management function. A project officer is often assigned in a project. That person or that individual, that function is the unifying agent, bearing primary responsibility of the project. It could be an engineering manager, it could be a project manager, it could be an administrator. There are different words for it, okay? But it serves as that main officer function. Projects have different functions that they have to do to serve the objectives that they set. Namely, there's analysis skills and analysis functions, there's design, there's quality assurance, right? There's planning functions, there's installation, validation or testing, and then logistics and field support, right? We talked about service and support. So all of these are different functions that have to support the project management organization. Conducting projects within a organization has different aspects. A functional organization is where there's a project management appointed to coordinate the activities. In this case, the project management has no line authority over most project personnel. They must lead by persuasion and influence almost exclusively. So this is how most organizations are organized and put together. They have HR function, they have IT function, they have business function, they have marketing. And then when they want to run a project, they assign a project agent or project person, manager, and give them different resources from different organizations, different functional organizations. So they don't directly work for the PM, but they have sort of a dotted line or a implicit relationship. And therefore, the PM only has limited control, right? They can't fire these people or discipline them beyond the context of the project. A project organization, on the other hand, is where the PM has direct control over all the elements needed to execute the project. They actually work for the PM. And matrix is sort of a hybrid, right? Project personnel report to both functional and project managers. The project manager controls tasks, resources, and is the focal point for the customer. The project manager controls the schedule, right? And communication to the customer. The functional manager, on the other hand, is responsible for assigning a functional specialist. So the project manager goes to the functional manager, says, I need a Java programmer, I need a production specialist, I need this, this, and this. Then the functional managers from the respective departments assign the right specialist for that project, okay? So the quality of work done is with the functional specialty, right? The function controls the quality. And so selecting, evaluating, rewarding the work stays within the specialty, not within the project manager purview. So if you look at, give me 1 second here. If we move now to what it takes to become an effective project manager, well, a lot of different skills. It's a blend. Project managers that are well sought after are highly technical, administratively competent, and have very good interpersonal skills. Now you can imagine these three are very difficult to find in one human being. So when you have a good project manager, he's worth his weight in gold, and he's also very, very valuable to the organization. What's the scope of responsibility? Well, generally he's involved in setting project priorities. He's involved in being the primary contact for the customer. He's the one-stop shop, right? Work defined by him to be performed by supporting departments in accordance to the cost, schedule, and performance that the team put together. He also controls the overall project budget. He's responsible to make sure design reviews happen. He's responsible to do configuration and design control activities. He's responsible for sourcing different resources on the project. Also responsible for providing project status and providing merit reviews of project personnel. Responsible for a lot of things, right? What are some of the characteristics associated with success? Well, you have to be committed to the parent organization. You've got to be committed to the schedules, the budget, the technical performance of the team. You've got to have public support. You've got to have credibility. You've got to be able to give and receive frequent feedback. It's a hard job. I held this job for 15 years of my life. It's very hard, very rewarding. You grow a lot. You can do so much, but it's pretty hard to get there. They have to also reduce bureaucracy, right? Most organizations climb bureaucracy, but when they're reporting to customers don't want to deal with that. They want answers quick. They want results. They have to be judicious in planning and using these tools that we've been talking about, right? They have to projectize the organization. They have to instill project values, which are very different, right? They're very time controlled. They are results oriented. They're very bottom line focused. They want satisfied customers. So these skills are really important, right? They're very hard to get these done correctly. This is majority of why, like a good big reason why projects fail. The lack of sponsorship, lack of good project management skills, right? Well, usually projects fail for these reasons, okay? These are the topmost reasons, right? Bad control, bad skills, not enough good skills putting together in the right people. Customer coordination, expectation setting is bad, right? Rapport with the team, with internal and external stakeholders, terrible, right? Not good at public relations. These are signs of project management failure. Now, when we enter into contracts, there are different types of contracts, right? These could be internal to the organization as well as external, like when you're doing client-facing consulting work. There's fixed price contract, but they come in different varieties. Fixed firm is just what the name sounds. Okay, we do this much scope, this much time, this much price, it's done, no variation. You have escalation, you have redeterminable ratios, you have incentive models. Incentive models I love creating a pricing structure where everybody's happy, and if we get done early, we can enjoy 10% incentive, right? Or bonuses, or to team members as well as to the project and to the company delivery. I love setting up incentive models because it puts the right focus. I used to do that a lot. I don't like fixed price, firm fixed price, because so much changes. Nothing is firm. How could you make the contract firm? What happens if there's changes? How do you it's very hard to negotiate that in firm fixed price. You know, the change control process has to be so precise. And then it builds animosity, and you start to get dissatisfied people, and you lose business and all of that other stuff. Cost type, cost plus incentive fee. Time and materials is the standard. Time and materials means you get what you pay for. You pay me, I tell you how the progress is going. You keep continuing to pay me. I keep delivering progress. If you want to stop the project, you stop the project. You only pay for what you do. A lot of people, this is the best way. If the relationship is healthy with the customer and the supplier or the project management team, then time and materials is the best way, because there's faith that people aren't wasting time, that they know what they're doing, they have knowledgeable resources, and they pay as the work gets done, or amount of work that needs to be done. If they can get done faster, they pay less. If they get done longer, they pay more. But a lot of organizations don't trust each other. And that's why lots of times time and materials is not opted for. They go into one of those fixed price fees, but that's very, very difficult because the environment is so changing. Imagine any project that was out there right now and COVID-19 hit, right? Nobody knew it was coming. Fixed price contracts are gonna have a hard time. They're gonna be playing the blame game, right? Time and materials project, they probably just stopped or halted or eased up. Nobody's losing any money. Nobody's losing any time unless they opt for it, right? So I am very big favor of time and materials, but not everyone is. It depends on the culture of the organization and the relationship with customers and so many other factors, okay? So let me pause here and ask some questions before we end the session. Thank you for listening.